Well, it wasn't long ago that North Korea called Donald Trump an old lunatic, and the U.S. president has repeatedly called Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man. Now they'll be coming face to face for a first-of-its-kind meeting. We don't know where or exactly when, but a South Korean delegation visiting the White House says it will happen by May.
I told President Trump that in our meeting, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said he is committed to denuclearization. Kim pledged that North Korea will refrain from any further nuclear or missile tests. He understands that the routine joint military exercises between the Republic of Korea and the United States must continue. And he expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible. President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong-un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization.
Well, CNN has correspondents covering this major story around the globe. Andrew Stevens is in Seoul, South Korea. Matt Rivers is in Beijing, and Kaori and Joji is in Tokyo. Welcome to you all. Andrew Stevens, to you first. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in has made a concerted effort to engage Pyongyang and resuscitate the South Sunshine policy. Now we have a meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un in the offing. Is this being viewed as a win for the South Korean president?
Very much so, Aisha. He has, as you say, been instrumental in pushing this forward, and it has moved forward at an extraordinary speed, given the fact that it was only on Monday that the two envoys from South Korea went to Pyongyang. And by Friday, we have not only a meeting between the US and the North Korean leaders, we also have a meeting between the two Korean leaders themselves. And a lot of this has been down to Moon pushing it. We knew that Kim Jong-un was wanting to reach out to South Korea. We found that out during his New Year's Day speech, and Moon was very quick to push on that. The works to get North Korea to the Winter Olympics were in motion already, but he certainly pushed that hard, and this is, as a result, what we're seeing now. It's interesting, just a bit more background, Aisha, on that meeting at the White House. Apparently, the two envoys who were sent from Seoul to meet senior leaders in the White House to debrief them on their meeting in Pyongyang, they weren't even scheduled to meet Donald Trump. They met with H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, who they then relayed the offer by Kim for this meeting. It was a verbal offer, it wasn't a written offer. McMaster then hurried along to the Oval Office to tell Trump. A meeting was very quickly convened between Trump and the Defense Secretary James Mattis, Chief of Staff John Kelly, and the Korean delegation. The delegation then outlined the offer once again, and Trump agreed very quickly to that. So yes, it is a triumph for Moon, and just the sheer speed of this has caught so many people by surprise. Even the White House senior advisor is not expecting Trump to go this far so quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Andrew, stand by for us. Matt Rivers, to you there in Beijing. China has made no secret of its wish to see talks between the US and North Korea take place, and for them to happen sooner rather than later. Now we have this May deadline, if you will. But many analysts are pointing to the fact North Korea has engaged in talks and agreed to deals in the past, only for it all to fall apart. How does Beijing view the road ahead?
Well, I think they view it pretty realistically, but also optimistically, given that this is exactly what Beijing has wanted to have happen here in this situation. Their consistent position is that the only way to solve this problem is that the United States and North Korea sit down and talk. And given that we were just hearing from senior administration officials earlier this week that negotiations between both sides were a long way away, only to see within a matter of hours of the South Korean delegation getting to Washington, D.C., that all of that changed, and now the top negotiator on the North Korean side and the top negotiator on the United States side could actually be sitting down within the next 2 to 3 months. Beijing must be looking at that like the rest of us and thinking that is absolutely remarkable and completely unexpected, at least in this short time frame. That said, let me read you a quote from a press conference that Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave yesterday, and he said, quote, "It takes more than one cold day to freeze 3 feet of ice. Despite light at the end of the tunnel, the journey ahead won't be smooth. History has reminded us time and time again that whenever tensions subsided on the peninsula, the situation would be clouded by various interferences." So some flowery language there, but really the sentiment is that we're hopeful, but we're also realistic that any sort of lasting peace negotiations, peace agreement on the peninsula could be a long way off.
All right, hopeful but cautious. Kaori, to you there in Tokyo. We understand that President Trump spoke to Japan's Prime Minister on Thursday. One would expect to brief him on this decision to meet with Kim Jong-un. Tokyo has been perhaps a little more alarmist, or certainly more publicly concerned by the accelerated engagement with North Korea. What's been the reaction to the news of this meeting being scheduled for May, where you are?
Well, Aisha, I think the reaction has been very cautious and very measured, and particularly for the reason that you mentioned, that Japan, along with South Korea, has been impacted the most, especially through the last year, as these missiles have flown very close to Japan, or over Japan in that case. And although there has been silence on the missile front since December, the Japanese Prime Minister saying, and other government officials acknowledging, that this might be a step in the right direction, but they're reiterating the line that they have used time and time again, that they will want to continue to apply maximum pressure on North Korea. Even during the Olympic Games, when there seemed to be a little bit of a thaw in the relationship that the global community had with North Korea, this is the line that Japan continued to reiterate, and that's what they are continuing to do today. It's what Japanese Prime Minister said even after his phone call with the U.S. President Donald Trump, and the line that's being reiterated from everyone from his defense minister to the foreign minister. There's also a sense of urgency into trying to cement the view that Japan is not being left out in these negotiations, that it has a rock-solid partnership with the U.S., which is the bedrock of its U.S. security policy. And in that front, the Japanese Prime Minister will be traveling to Washington next month in April to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. I think there are going to be a lot of question marks still on the minds of Japanese citizens and government officials, and perhaps we'll get more clarity on their thinking next week, because one of the envoys that was sent to North Korea to discuss the matter with Kim Jong-un will be visiting, in fact, Japan next week for 2 days, on Monday and Tuesday, where he will brief Japanese officials on that meeting. Perhaps we'll get a little bit more concrete comments from Japanese government officials. So for the time being, Aisha, a very cautious approach, and reiterating the stance that's absolutely necessary for Japan and the international community to continue to apply maximum pressure on North Korea.
Very interesting, Kaori. Thank you. Andrew Stevens, back to you in Seoul. Hearing what Kaori is saying there, Japan's position, keep the pressure on. Of course, Donald Trump himself has actually said the same, that, you know, that pressure, the sanctions, everything will stay in place until talks get underway and a deal is done. But I wonder whether that's the same feeling there in Seoul, given, of course, the proximity to the north, given the fact that this is a win for Moon Jae-in. Is he still rock solid behind this system of international pressure on Pyongyang?
At this stage, very much so, Aisha. And there has been suggestions that the whole strategy of Kim Jong-un is to drive a wedge between South Korea and the United States on their dealing with North Korea and how to handle this whole nuclear issue. At the moment, though, the South Koreans are reiterating to anyone that this maximum pressure policy will be maintained. That, as President Moon said, that he was optimistic, but also realises this is just the very, very beginning. And you know, look at why Kim Jong-un is doing this in the first place. There is a growing thought that it is because of the sanctions, of that maximum pressure that has been applied by the international community through the United Nations, by China abiding with the UN sanctions, and by the US going above and beyond those sanctions. Kim Jong-un is looking at the long term. He's looking at his dynasty, the Kim dynasty, staying in power. There's anecdotal reports that the activity between the business activity on towns which border North Korea and China has dwindled to virtually nothing, and that the North Koreans are indeed hurting. And this is why Kim is now taking this move. And he took a big gamble in approaching Donald Trump the way he did, and he got what he wanted. He got an agreement from Trump straight off the bat. No preconditions from the US, no negotiations. We will just meet and talk about denuclearization. This is what South Korea wants to see, while these sanctions remain very much in place.
It is indeed a remarkable day. Andrew Stevens joining us there in Seoul, South Korea. Matt Rivers there in Beijing. Kaori and Joji in Tokyo. My thanks to all of you. Well, Philip Yoon is Executive Director and COO of the Ploughshares Fund and a former advisor on North Korea to President Bill Clinton. He joins me now live from San Francisco. Philip, always good to see you, particularly in these hours as we all process the news of this scheduled meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. Some are calling the moment extraordinary. Some are saying that this is a stunning development. What's your reaction?
Well, yes, I always said don't get too high and don't get too low when dealing with North Korea. But in this case, I'd have to say this is a remarkable event compared to what was happening as little as 2 months ago. I think what we have here is an opportunity. And there are certainly a lot of questions, a lot of landmines to actually getting to a summit. But it is really a much better place where we are now than when we were, let's say, 2 months ago, when people were talking realistically possibly about a bloody no strategy or a unilateral strike. And so I think this is something that we have to take seriously and see what happens.
The South Korean envoys were very clear in their statement, which was delivered outside the White House. They said that President Trump's leadership and maximum pressure, together with international solidarity, brought them to this juncture. The Trump administration immediately touting this moment as a victory for all that President Trump has said and done over the last few months. Of course, we all remember Fire and Fury, Little Rocket Man, my button is bigger than your button. You know, we're here now. So was he right? Did he get it right?
Well, I think that's one theory. Personally, I've always agreed that the United States, for various reasons, had to increase their defensive measures in support of South Korea and Japan. And I think the whole notion of more sanctions and more pressure was something we absolutely had to do. And what had been missing was the component of a conversation to see what those things, what is actually possible. I don't know, though, if actually this tough talk and the sanctions really pushed North Korea. There's another theory, and the other theory is this, which Kim Jong-un basically stated in November. They feel that they have a deterrent. And so therefore they feel relatively secure right now and feel that they have the confidence in order then to talk with the United States on equal footing. We do have a moratorium and a freeze right now, but one of the things that people may not quite understand is North Korea continues to produce fissile material, the material that goes boom, 1 bomb's worth of material every 8 weeks, and that's an insurance policy for them. So I think it remains to be seen what actually is pushing North Korea to these particular talks right now.
I mean, as you talk about, because as you frame it, and that line of thinking is that North Korea is coming to the table from a position of strength. They feel strong, and that's why they're open to this meeting. Some have said giving them this meeting, President Trump going straight ahead and agreeing to a meeting, not waiting for lower-level talks to take place, but saying, yes, I will sit down, is validating that, validating them as a nuclear state, and that carries risks and problems down the line. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree. I don't think that talks for talk's sake really we have nothing to fear related to that. We're in so much better position than North Korea is. So I don't have a problem with having these talks. I mean, we have to reach a deal for us to avoid possibly a cataclysmic conflict or accepting North Korea as a nuclear state. We've got to have a conversation, and up to this point we have not. So I think this is a good move on the part of the president. I also want to note the fact that this is kind of a style that I think may actually produce something relatively big. That's just one thought, because there's a tendency for the North Koreans to want to, if you want to move and move quickly, you do it at the top. If you recall, back in 1994, Jimmy Carter met with Kim Il-sung, the grandfather, and they came very quickly to a deal. There's a tendency when you allow things to happen at a relatively lower level, things get bogged down. And so I think there is a possibility here, but again, there are a lot of details that have to be worked out and a lot of things that could go wrong, and because we've seen it before.
The question, I think, on the minds of most analysts, most watchers is, what does Kim Jong-un want in return? What do you think?
Well, on one hand, he said that he wanted security assurances. So what the maximal or the opening bid has been removal of U.S. troops, the end of the U.S. ROK treaty or security alliance and the nuclear umbrella over South Korea and Japan, which are all non-starters, but he wants to make sure that his regime will exist. The other thing is a degree of prestige and legitimacy. So that's something we're going to have to figure out how to give to him in a way that he can tout to his own people, because they've invested so much in these nuclear weapons. And the third is some kind of benefits. I mean, sanctions relief is going to be one of them, but his economy is in tough shape, and he himself has put himself on the hook with his first public remarks in 2011, where he said he was going to make the economy better. So those are the things that we have to give to him, and we have to make sure that whatever we get is verifiable and actually prevents him from getting his, that actually rolls back his nuclear capability. It doesn't have to happen now, but at some point it has to happen.
We are almost out of time, Phil, but I want to ask you, we haven't heard anything in the North Korean media verifying all of this, and we've been watching. I know you and I have spoken, you know, before today. When a statement is made, because the expectation is obviously if this meeting has been agreed to, there will be some kind of statement made in Pyongyang on state media. How will it be framed?
Well, I think what they're going to say is they will tout this in a way that is very complimentary and is a tribute to Kim Jong-un and his leadership. That's the way the North Koreans are going to frame this. I take heart in the fact that the North Koreans haven't contradicted anything at this point, but that always leaves them a little bit wiggle room if at some point they decide to continue to push and push harder, which they inevitably will, to make sure they get the best deal that they possibly can, if there is a deal to be had.
Indeed. Philip Yoon joining us there from San Francisco. Philip Yoon with the Ploughshares Fund. Thank you. Always appreciate the insight.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take